We know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail. Whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one
than this administration.
Well, I heard his speech, and I tell you, you're talking about JD's speech, right?
Yes, sir.
I heard his speech, and he talked about freedom of speech, and I think it's true in Europe. It's losing. They're losing their wonderful right of freedom.
It's a court case. I'm not a criminal offender. I'm a civil offender, so I shouldn't even be in it. I'm not a criminal offender, so I get the 50% off. They get 60. I think some of them get 70 from January. But that's only a difference of a month off. But that's a big difference when someone's sitting on solitary.
Kier Starmer's speech in Munich was intended as a chance to showcase his strength and put Britain back on the global stage. However, instead of commanding respect, the U.S. Vice President delivered an embarrassing response, revealing a brutal reality. Check and leaving Starmer exposed in front of world leaders.
And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest. The moment they...
Starmer's scrambling speech at an international event is a warning sign that his leadership is not as strong as he claims, and even his closest allies are questioning his direction. This moment is not just about a bad speech, but also a warning that Britain is losing its standing under Starmer's leadership.
I'm a civil offender, so I got 18 months, which is insane anyway, for playing a film that they said wasn't in the public's interest. Well, I think it's on 115 million views. It certainly was in the public's interest, yeah? But they sentenced me to 18 months. Now, as a civil offender, you go to an open prison. What's the difference between that and how I'm being held? Well, open prison, you get a job outside. You have a car, you go to work. You go stay at home 5 days a month. You have town visits where you...
Kier Starmer's speech in Munich aimed to prove Britain's global dominance, focusing on democracy, global cooperation, and the UK's commitment to international stability. He emphasized strengthening alliances with European partners, tackling global security threats, and positioning Britain as a key player in shaping the future. However, Starmer's leadership in the UK is questionable, as many are already questioning his ability to deliver on his promises. His vision of a strong, confident Britain is not enough to convince many.
We gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with...
The speaker aimed to present himself as a unifier to mend relations with Europe after Brexit. But his speech raised questions about his influence and ability to convince the world that Britain is still a powerhouse amidst economic uncertainty, social division, and growing restrictions on free speech. His vision seemed good on paper, but when put to the test, it clashed with the harsh reality of his leadership. The U.S. Vice President responded, revealing that the message was not landing as expected, and instead of appearing strong, he appeared to be trying desperately to hold on to an image that no longer fits the reality of his government.
You go to for committing civil offences. Yeah, I'm shipped to a maximum security jail housing the worst Muslim gangs and jihadists in the country. What day is it today? It's Thursday. My routine tomorrow, Friday. At 8:30, because people say, yeah, I've got the gym. I have got the gym. So at 8:30 in the morning, I'll get collected for the gym. I'll get taken over to another 8 empty unit. I'm on a wing with 16 cells. It's just me. Yeah. Then I get taken through 19 sets of doors to another unit. It's a high security, maximum security unit, where I'm allowed to use a gym. I'm on my own. So they lock me in a little small gym area. So I go there on my own. They lock me in a gym. I work out. Yeah, I'll do an hour run. I'll go on the bike for an hour. And then I bang the door. And then they'll open the door and they'll bring me outside. And then there's like an exercise yard. So I walk around that on my own.
Kier Starmer, a UK leader, received an unexpected public rebuke from the US Vice President after speaking. The rebuke exposed the gap between Starmer's words and the reality, shattering the image he had built. The Vice President emphasized that Britain under Starmer's leadership, wasn't as strong, stable, or influential as he claimed. The room went quiet, and some diplomats exchanged glances, took notes, and looked surprised at the bluntness of the response. This was not just an awkward moment, but also humiliating, as the leader of one of his closest allies publicly questions his credibility, not only hurting his image but also damaging his standing on the world stage.
Backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could
Starmer's leadership has been criticized for raising concerns about his ability to be seen as a strong global leader. Despite attempts to brush it off, the damage done to his image has been significant, indicating a lack of confidence among world EB leaders. The U.S. Vice President's public challenge to Starmer in public was seen as a sign of his weakness and lack of depth. His leadership is already raising red flags both in the UK and abroad, as his government is cracking down on basic freedoms. Free speech in the UK is being restricted, with decline laws being used to silence opinions that don't align with the government's agenda. People are being arrested for praying in public, and social media users are facing police raids for hateful content. Religious expression is also under threat.
Influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not.
The UK's current leadership, under the leadership of Prime Minister Tony Blair, is causing a diplomatic crisis. The country is becoming more like a surveillance state, with world leaders increasingly concerned about the country's moral authority on the world stage. While Blair can talk about democracy, his actions are sending a message that Britain is no longer a strong free nation. Allies are questioning whether Britain can still be trusted as a serious global player, as its influence is shrinking rapidly under his leadership. This situation is not just a domestic issue, but also a diplomatic problem.
That's that. And then they'll bring me in, and then they'll bring me in, I'll go in the shower room. Luckily, on my own in the shower room. But that's my routine. And then at 11:30, I'm put back in my cell. And then from 11:30 till the next morning, I'm sat in my cell. So 21 hours a day, I sit on that bed. Now, I wouldn't be moaning. I don't want people to feel sorry for me, but the injustice of it all is this shouldn't be happening. Why shouldn't it be happening? Because that's mental torture. Google Sanctuary Confinement. It's a decision that that their own mental health teams in here have said will be devastating for my mental health. Yet the government...
World leaders are concerned about the UK's weak leadership, particularly in the UK, which is raising concerns among allies and the US. The UK's closest partner, the US, is increasingly skeptical of the UK's ability to lead European leaders, who expected stability after Brexit. The UK's handling of free speech, religious freedom, and censorship is raising eyebrows abroad, and the country is struggling to convince foreign investors that it is still a good place to do business. The rush towards green policies without a solid transition plan has led to job losses, particularly in the automotive industry.
Where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square. Agree.
The question of Britain's relevance has shifted from leading to whether it can command respect at home. A leader who cannot command respect at home will not command respect on the world stage. The UK is at risk of being sidelined in global discussions, as allies are looking elsewhere for strong leadership. Under Starmer, Britain is slipping further into the background. The Munich speech, intended to show strength, exposed the extent of Britain's influence under his rule. Starmer's attempt to present himself as a strong leader collapsed in front of an international audience.
Well, how long will I be held like this? 9 months. So you're not going to send me to an open prison? Why not? Why not? And what's the difference? When I got sentenced in Belmarsh, when I got to prison, everyone who goes to jail now, because the prisons are full, everyone gets 60% off. Not me. I wasn't allowed 60% off. So everyone does.
The media criticized UK Prime Minister Tony Blair for failing to defend his position in the Brexit referendum, claiming he lacks the necessary backbone to stand firm on the world stage. Critics argued that Britain, once America's closest and most reliable ally, was now treated more like a secondary player. Public reaction was mixed, with many seeing the incident as confirmation of the shaky approval ratings of Blair. Instead of leaving Munich as a respected leader, Blair left looking weak and incapable of defending Britain's place in global politics.